Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. Just a reminder, there will be no video this Monday, but there will be regular episodes from Tuesday. In yesterday's video, we discussed US-China relations and observed that the fallout from the sighting of an alleged Chinese spy balloon could cause issues for US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's long-awaited trip to Beijing, the first from a US Secretary of State since Rex Tillerson in 2017. Soon after the publication of yesterday's video, Blinken said at a press conference that he had postponed the China trip due to the Chinese balloon over the United States. On Friday morning, local time, he informed China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, that he was postponing. Quote, "In my call today with Director Wang Yi, I made clear that the presence of this surveillance balloon in U.S. airspace is a clear violation of U.S. sovereignty and international law, that it's an irresponsible act, and that the People's Republic of China's decision to take this action on the eve of my planned visit is detrimental to the substantive discussions that we were prepared to have." End quote. The balloon has caused a political stir in the US itself, left Beijing somewhat red-faced, and thrown a spanner in the works for US-China relations. But so far, US officials and commentators agree that it doesn't pose much of a military threat to the United States. Earlier this week, one Defense Department official expressed to UK-based Financial Times, quote, "Clearly the intent of this balloon is for surveillance, but it does not create significant value added over and above what the PRC is likely able to collect through things like satellites in low Earth orbit." End quote. Bloomberg writes that the high-altitude balloon, now floating at 60,000 feet over the continental US, quote, is part of a broader Chinese spying program that's seen many such devices sent over the nation, including some during the Trump administration, according to US officials. End quote. Political commentators agree that Secretary Blinken's postponement of his China trip is somewhat of a big deal. Quote, "The visit would not have turned the tide away from a darker bilateral era, but it could have, as was hoped before the November meeting, helped to build a floor for the relationship. There are signs that in the immediate term, bilateral ties could face more downward pressure. Blinken could have gone anyway, but I think it's reasonable to speculate that the decision was made that the political optics on the home front would be unacceptable. Even if he had gone ahead with it, any even modest outcomes would have been under a cloud, so there's a pragmatic diplomatic reason to delay, in addition to the political optics." End quote. Before we move on, we should ask, how has Beijing responded to this attention on this balloon? Well, on Thursday, a foreign ministry spokesperson initially said that they would need time to look into the issue. Later in the day, the ministry provided the following statement. Quote, "The airship is from China. It is a civilian airship used for research, mainly meteorological purposes. The airship deviated far from its planned course. The Chinese side regrets the unintended entry of the airship into US airspace." End quote. Based on US moves and comments from officials, Washington is not buying this explanation. Next up, the economy. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. As you guys know, this channel primarily relies on subscriber support. Anyone who can go that extra mile and be part of the community that does provide this incredible support, which allows me to continue with these episodes for you guys every day. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. We are now in February and are finally getting more granular numbers on specific industries and how they performed in 2022. Unsurprisingly, they don't look very good at all, and they remind us just how acute China's economic crises became last year. For example, in 2022, SANY, SANY, Heavy Industry Co. Limited, China's top construction machinery manufacturer, estimated an annual profit plunge of 66%. In its exchange filing this week, the company attributed the poor performance to zero COVID and the property slowdown. We remember China's real estate investments fell 10% year-on-year in 2022, the first decline since records began in 1999, and the floor space of buildings under construction and completed buildings in China was down 39.4% and 15% year-on-year respectively. Sunny Heavy Industry Co. Limited's experience was fairly representative of others in the critically important sector. According to the China Construction Machinery Association, China's 26 major excavator makers saw domestic sales plunge 44.6% in 2022 year-on-year. Fortunately, the sector was saved by moderate international demand. The sector is hurting though, but analysts are hopeful that it may see some recovery this year. Quote, the domestic real estate industry is making marginal improvements. Infrastructure, as an important starting point for stable growth, will continue to gather pace, or the impact of the epidemic will gradually disappear, and domestic demand will usher in a recovery. End quote. Meanwhile, another sector hit hard by zero COVID is, of course, China's civil aviation industry. In 2022, passenger numbers dropped to a 12-year low, down 42.9% versus 2021, and annual losses, $31.8 billion, exceeded 2020 and 2021's losses combined. Cargo throughput at airports decreased 18.5% year-on-year in 2022. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai last week reported that Chinese airlines have accumulatively registered a combined loss estimated at almost $500 billion since the pandemic began. The entire industry had to be bailed out by Beijing. Looking ahead to 2023, there are some early signs, however, that the airline sector could be seeing a moderate rebound. During the official holiday period, trips via road, railway and airlines jumped over 50% versus the same period last year, according to data from the Ministry of Transport. However, we should note that this rate was still 47% lower than pre-pandemic levels in 2019. The Civil Aviation Administration of China has said that it expects 460 million people this year to travel, or about 75% of the pre-pandemic level in 2019. Okay, let's look at one more sector, one for which we already have January data. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that China's auto market started 2023 with a sales plunge of nearly 45%, which it attributes to the end of government subsidies and the effect the week-long Lunar New Year holiday had on sales. Last year we discussed how government subsidies had caused an increase in demand for new energy vehicles, but also anticipating that this demand would drop once subsidies ended. Sales of new energy vehicles declined 1% year-on-year in January to 304,000 units, but were down a massive 43% from December. Quote, China terminated state subsidies for new energy vehicles and tax cuts for low-emission gasoline cars in December, prompting a rush of purchases at the end of last year and sapping demand in the new year. End quote. Okay, and last up, I wanted to finish today's video by looking at two recent reports from excellent think tanks discussing rather complementary themes: the re-emergence of state capitalism. The first is from Washington-based Peterson Institute for International Economics. Quote, China's state sector grew at 57.2% of the country's largest listed firms in the second half of 2022, with the private sector's share dropping 1.7 percentage points from 44.5% in mid-2022 to 42.8% at year-end. This trend among the country's 100 largest listed firms ranked by market value began in the second half of 2021, when the private sector's share began declining from a mid-year peak then of 55.4%. Still, the private sector share remains higher than it was throughout the 2010s, when it rose dramatically from 8% at the end of 2010 to 36% at the end of 2019. It remains to be seen then whether China's trajectory will be a pivot back to a Maoist-style economy that represses the private sector, or merely a new phase of market-driven development under changed political conditions. The data at end 2022 suggests that President Xi Jinping's corporate rectification campaign, started in the summer of 2021, has dealt a heavy but far from lethal blow to China's hitherto fast-rising private sector. End quote. The second report is from the also Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies. Quote, What is CCP Inc.? At the conclusion of a multi-year project examining China's state-capitalist system, this CSIS report distills key observations about the changing nature of China's domestic economic management and the international behavior of Chinese companies, state organizations, and financiers, changing national mechanisms for extending Chinese Communist Party (CCP) authority over the economy, and a proliferation of new financial institutions underpin a CCP Inc. ecosystem with a unique internal logic and new adaptability to respond to policy shifts. The strength of this ecosystem allows CCP Inc. to compete internationally as a well-resourced group of coordinated actors. However, recent changes to the operation of CCP Inc. and the external environment in which it operates foreshadow major changes for the ecosystem. End quote. Both reports are well worth the read. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all on Tuesday.